Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, story changers, and welcome back to the next episode of the Isolation Inspiration Interview series. Today's guest is Catherine Morgan. Catherine is a multi-award-winning qualified financial planner and money coach on a mission to change the financial services industry from one of complicated financial products to one that helps educate in simple language with no financial jargon and no suits. She is the founder of the Money Panel and the Money Circle. In 2018 and 19, she was nominated as a finalist for 3 awards in the Women in Financial Services Awards, and in 2019 she won a highly commended award for Role Model of the Year 2019. In 18 and again in 19, her money podcast, In Her Financial Shoes, was nominated as a finalist for UK Money Blogger SHOMO Award for Best Money Podcast. Catherine has been featured in Forbes, The Telegraph, Stylist, Good Housekeeping, Closer, The Daily Mail, and the Huffington Post. She is also a co-author for an Amazon best-selling book, The Woman I'm Becoming, inspiring teenage girls as they approach life's challenges and crossroads. In 2019, Catherine has joined as a director for the executive of Initiative for Financial Wellbeing. The initiative is to bring people together under the umbrella of money and happiness to help clients to become happier, not just wealthier. One thing Catherine is passionate about is getting people talking about money. Catherine regularly produces video content in her community in her PJs to get others to relax around the taboo subject of money. In this interview today, you will learn therapy can help, but you have to find the right therapy for you. When you have money troubles, identify what emotion is making you feel uncomfortable. Our beliefs are often handed down to us generationally, and in the coronavirus situation, aim for progress, not perfection. You're going to learn this and so much more in this interview with Catherine Morgan. Catherine, welcome to the Author Your Life podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Catherine, I'd like to open up the space today and allow the audience to find out a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Would you like to share with us your story here on the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Where would you like me to begin?
Begin wherever seems appropriate.
Sure. So, well, perhaps I'll introduce myself first of all. So, my name is Catherine Morgan. I am the founder of the Money Panel, and I'm a qualified financial planner and multi-award-winning financial coach, which some people may not have come across, depending on where you're listening to this episode, whether you're in the UK or whether you're in another country. But financial coaching in the UK right now is a growing profession, really, in terms of the way that people are looking for help and support around finance, but not necessarily specifically around product recommendations, things like pensions and investments and life insurance. They actually are, and certainly from my experience of running the business for a few years now, there's a lot of support that's required to actually help us uncover our relationship with money, because actually behind every single financial situation is a set of beliefs, is a set of thoughts and a set of emotions. And from my own personal experience of growing up and having a really negative relationship with money, which perhaps I can share with you today, having been a professional financial advisor for almost 20 years now, didn't mean that I was good with money, because I was actually being driven by my previous experiences, things that have happened in my childhood. And it really helped me to develop this whole idea of financial coaching, which is all about helping clients to uncover their relationship with money, so that then when they understand the how-tos, the how to set up a pension, how to invest in the stock market, how to create a spending plan, the financial education piece, then they can make sure that they find a way to manage money that actually suits their relationship with money.
Mm-hmm. So you dangle the carrot, Catherine, I'm going to bite. Tell us about this negative relationship with money that you used to have.
Yeah, so in my teenage years, I had a lot of issues around eating disorders, right from the age of sort of 14, 15. And there's many reasons for that. My parents divorced when I was very little. I was bullied at school. I was very academic at school, but quite badly bullied at school. And consequently for me, I'm a twin. I have a twin brother. He emigrated to the other side of the world when I was 15. My dad emigrated to the other side of the world when I was 15. And so I felt at that age very lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had obviously close members of my family that were moving to the other side of the world. And I kind of lost my identity, and I went very insular. It was quite a dark place of my life, actually. And the way that I dealt with that depression and anxiety was internally. So I would beat myself up. I would feel negative about my body. I felt a lot of shame. I would always look to other people and try and copy what they were doing. So if they were wearing, a Levi's pair of jeans, I'd go and buy those Levi's pair of jeans, thinking that, well, they're happy and they're confident. So if I do the same, surely I'll feel better about myself. And in reality, all I was really doing from a psychological perspective was actually just burying all of the deeper rooted causes of that anxiety and depression. And so the impact for me was that as I grew up, when I started to earn money, right the way from my first pocket money job, like working in this asparagus farm in the middle of the winter, it was the most horrendous job I've ever done. And when I received any money, the first thing that I would do is get rid of it. And largely on clothes. So back in the 80s, I'm an 80s girl. It would be on catalogs, store cards, just borrowing money all of the time, because that gave me a sense of fulfillment. It gave me a sense of worthiness. It gave me a sense of confidence. On the surface, it did, certainly. And so when I grew up through my 20s, I still had this bad relationship with money. I was being driven to spend money on things that I felt would give me that satisfaction that obviously didn't. And I ended up in this debt cycle. So I ended up in this cycle of, I want to feel better, I'll spend this money on clothes to make me feel better, and end up just sitting in my wardrobe, and then I'd go, the whole cycle would continue again on the next payroll. And at that time, I was working at the bank, so I was helping other people to manage money, and actually feeling even worse about it myself, because I was giving other people great advice on how to manage their own money, but yet I wasn't doing it for myself. And I see this all the time with clients that I work with now, with doctors, with accountants. People that are in these professions don't necessarily mean that we follow that advice. Even if we know what we should be doing, we don't always follow the same advice. And for me, growing up through my 20s, there was one particular day in my life that completely changed everything. And this one particular day, I was 27 years old, and I was actually living out in the Channel Islands. So myself and my soon-to-be husband at that time were living in the UK. We were living in quite a nice house, had a nice car, had good jobs. And I felt really deflated in working in financial services at that moment. And I didn't feel like I could go any further in my career, in what I was doing. I was a financial advisor at that time. And so an opportunity came up for me to go and work out in Jersey in the Channel Islands. And so my husband-to-be and I had just come off a charity trek in the Andes, which is where he proposed to me. And we came back from Peru with a whole fresh insight into life. It really that trip taught us about being grateful for simple things, like being able to have an omelette every morning at home. And, yet people in Peru were on ration food and, chasing guinea pigs around in their houses, catching these little guinea pigs to then go and fry on the stove, in front of their brothers and sisters. It was a real eye-opener for us. And when we went out to Jersey, what happened from there is that I was walking walking to work one day along the beachfront. It's a beautiful, beautiful island to live on. And I walked into the coffee shop, and in front of me in the coffee shop was a leaflet about personal styling. And for anyone who hasn't heard of personal styling, this was where you have an image consultant come and spend a day with you, and they go through your wardrobes, they weed it all out for you, they tell you what colours you should wear and all of these things. And this lady came to my house, and she weeded through all of my probably 10 wardrobes full of clothes and drawers and everything else. And that evening, I sat on my red couch in the middle of this little parish in the dark. It was pitch black outside. I was in this little cottage in Jersey, sat on my red couch, and I just cried my eyes out. And it was like someone had given me permission to get rid of all the crap that I'd been hoarding for so many years in the hope that I'd feel better about myself. And this lady finally gave me permission to stop looking at everybody else and focus on myself. And that moment changed my entire life in so many different ways. And I didn't even know that at the time. The first immediate way that it changed my life is that I started to feel more confident in what I was wearing, spending less money on clothes. That was the immediate impact. But the bigger picture was that I then found that actually I wanted to empower women to be confident with their bodies. And shortly after that, I actually fell pregnant. So my whole body changed anyway. And we then got married and had my first son in Jersey. And I actually flew over the lady who trained the lady that did my consultation. I flew this lady over. She spent 2 weeks with me, and we did an intensive course about personal styling. And I became a personal stylist. That was my first business. And I spent a number of years, a good 7 or 8 years, running that business as like a side hustle. I was still working at the bank. When I had my son, I was working part-time. So I had him at home a few days a week. I was working at the bank a few days a week. And then I was running this business at the weekend. And shortly after that, we then moved back from the UK, from Jersey to the UK. And I then fell pregnant a year later with my second son. And this was the second, so the business was running in the background. I was running workshops from home. I was helping women to feel more confident about their bodies. I was doing some local campaigns with helping mums with their body confidence. And we did a Mums Tums campaign where we got women to take photographs of their tummies after they'd had babies, and just showing other women that actually there's nothing to be ashamed of, by having different bodies after you've had children. And I absolutely loved it, but it wasn't particularly an opportunity to make a huge amount of money. It wasn't a wealth generating business. It was just something that I really loved. And when we came back to the UK, this would have been in 2012. Yeah, 2012 we came back. And in 2013, my son Thomas was born. Now, just to kind of put into perspective, when my first son was born, I didn't have a very successful delivery. I was knocked out and put to sleep for the delivery. And I had a lot of emotional turmoil around that. I had a lot of postnatal depression issues after my first son was born. And so when my second son was born, he was born naturally. I had a natural birth with him. I was awake, and everybody was on a real high. It was a beautiful birth. But unfortunately, after having Thomas in our lives for 3 days, he got very, very poorly very, very quickly. And we were told that there was a 50-50 chance that he was going to survive. And we got through that period. He was in hospital for a week. He was put on very strong antibiotics. He had some kind of infection. They never really know what it was. But we all survived it. We all got through it with a 2.5-year-old at the time. It was a tough time, but we got through it. And fast forward just 4 weeks on from that moment, it was the 1st of October 2013. I remember it as clear as anything. And I had my friend coming round for the day to do some baby hand casting. So this is where you get the baby to put their hands and their feet into some clay. And it was Father's Day kind of coming up a few months later. I thought this would make a really nice gift for my husband. And so my friend came over for the day with her baby. And that morning I woke up with Thomas, and he'd had a pretty odd night's sleep, in the fact that he'd slept a lot, which for a 5-week-old, we were like, yes, we've got a sleeper. This is brilliant. But then as the morning progressed, he was squirming around. He was actually grunting in his sleep, which we thought was kind of cute. We were like, oh, look, he was like making this little funny noise. But then as the day progressed, we thought, this doesn't quite sound right. And he didn't want to be picked up. He didn't want to feed. He just didn't want to do anything. And so I actually left him in the Moses basket in the lounge in the bay window for quite a few hours, actually. My friend arrived, we had a good old cup of tea, having a chat, cuckooing with her baby. And then the lady arrived to do this hand casting session. And it was my time to go and get Thomas out of the Moses basket for his printing session. And as I picked him up and unwrapped his hands and his feet from the baby grow, his hands were literally like ice. And I was thinking, that's really strange. The heating's on, it's a cold day outside, but that's odd. And then he just screamed blue murder at me, like he just didn't want to be picked up. And I turned to my friend and I said, something's not right. I'm going to book a doctor's appointment. And obviously by this point, we'd almost lost him at 3 days old. So I was kind of being that super overcautious mum. And I thought, no, I'm going to go with my intuition. I'm going to book a doctor's appointment. And I said to my friend, do you mind if you leave a little bit earlier? Because I just want to get him down to the doctor's. And within half an hour, I went over to his Moses basket in the bay window, and he was lying as still as anything. His eyes were open, and he was just looking up at the ceiling with no expression on his face, and he was just blinking, but it was like every blink was really painful. And he looked a little bit grey. And I looked at him, and I rang my husband, and I said, I'm going straight to A&E. Can you meet me there? And I put Thomas in the car seat. I drove immediately down to hospital. Luckily, my youngest one was at nursery at the time. And literally within minutes of arriving, Thomas's condition just rapidly deteriorated. And within 20 minutes, we had all these doctors swarming around us, and they put me on this wheelchair, had Thomas in my arms, and they wheeled me into resuscitation. And even now, I get quite upset thinking about it. And the doctors are all swarming around us. And this one particular doctor kept saying sepsis. And I remember thinking, I think I know what sepsis is, but I'm not 100% sure. And we were then admitted onto the wards. We were very lucky, actually. He didn't have to go immediately into intensive care. They put him straight onto antibiotics. The following day, they did a lumbar puncture, which is one of the worst things that anyone can ever experience, in my opinion. And then within 2 days of that, we were then told that he had bacterial meningitis. And bacterial meningitis is like the worst form of meningitis. This is the one it needs urgent, immediate care. Otherwise, it can be devastating. And we were very, very lucky that we caught it very early. Well, I say very early on. Not in the meningitis can literally attack the body within hours. So we were very fortunate that we identified some of the symptoms and signs very early on. And he's now a happy 6-year-old little boy. But the consequence for me of that moment was I didn't know that sepsis was the biggest killer of newborn babies. I didn't know that the signs of sepsis were cold hands and cold feet. I didn't know these things as a mum. So when I came out of hospital, I felt proud of myself that I'd got him in there so quickly and saved his life. But I also felt a lot of pressure. Everyone kept saying to me, yeah, what if it wasn't for you, he wouldn't be around? And I felt a lot of pressure because of that. And consequently, I was then diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because what happened for me when I got back home after having 2 weeks in hospital with him was that every time he cried, it took me back to a moment in hospital when I had a doctor who was trying to give medication to Thomas through the syringe, and he kept pushing and pushing his syringe into Thomas. And I was saying to this doctor at the time, the syringe is coming out of his hand. You need to take it out and put it somewhere else. And the doctor's like, no. I need to get this medication in Thomas as quickly as possible. And the cannula was basically digging into his hand. And after 20 minutes of Thomas screaming whilst I was holding him, the doctor was completely ignoring me and focusing on that end solution, the end result of what he wanted to get into Thomas, which was the medication. And at the end of all of that 20 minutes of screaming, the doctor finally listened to me and said, right, we need to go in through his foot because we run out of veins, which was awful, but necessary. But that one moment of when I couldn't control anything around me, every time he cried when I got back home, it brought me back to that one moment when I couldn't do anything. And I then went into a very significant period of post-traumatic stress disorder. And you can imagine having a 2.5-year-old and a 5 or a 7-week-old baby and not having either of them cry was near on impossible. So it took me a good number of years to kind of get through that process before actually recognizing that I needed to get some proper help to kind of deal with that consequence. And returning back to work a year later, those two moments in my life together really made me question working in the bank, selling financial products to people. How many of those clients that I was helping had no idea about the complicatedness around the financial jargon in the industry that was being used while I was in hospital? Sepsis, like septicemia. Why didn't they just say septicemia? I would have understood that. I didn't understand what sepsis was. And I wondered how many people, when they go in to see a financial advisor or walk into a bank, don't understand any of this complicated financial jargon. And that's the whole reason why I set up the Money Panel, was to try and come at it from two perspectives. One, to create change in the financial services industry so that we can actually focus much more on helping people with their underlying emotional relationship with money, in the same way that I felt in my 20s and racked up 30 grand's worth of debt. And also to help consumers with getting some clearer direction and actually managing money for themselves, because most financial advisors, don't charge in the way to support people that are building wealth and on that wealth creation journey. And so that was the whole reason for setting up the Money Panel business, which now today helps in both of those areas.
Well, Catherine, you've been through the gauntlet in terms of emotions, in terms of your mental health, and I think your experiences and what you've got to share will be very applicable at this time. A lot of people are experiencing mental health issues already, and I think this is only getting worse the longer this situation goes on. Do you have anything to share that helped you when you were going through mental health difficulties yourself?
From my experience, a couple of things. I would say the first thing is, and I know everybody talks about this, but reaching out for help. Because sometimes we get into a position where we label ourselves with having mental health issues, and actually they're not really mental health issues. We just need a little bit of extra help. And sometimes we can give that to ourselves by perhaps, thinking about how we're spending our time, for example. So I think we need to really clearly differentiate between those people that are really suffering mental health conditions and people that are just feeling really overwhelmed with emotion. Because actually there's a lot of things that you can do to support your own well-being without necessarily having to, get on 6-month waiting lists to go and speak to counsellors or therapists or to seek advice. So I think it's important, first of all, to reflect internally, to think about what are you doing for yourself to support your own well-being? Because right now there's a lot of people currently, if you're listening to this in April 2020, there's a lot of people that have got their children working from home right now that are feeling this responsibility that they have to continue with what they were doing prior to 2 weeks ago, when in actual fact, everybody's lives have changed. We are going into a new world. And so in order to adapt to that new world, we have to adapt our way of working. And if we try and do all the things that we were doing, perhaps working from home or running your own business, or before you had your children at home, then clearly that's going to have an impact on your time. And making sure that we actually have our own well-being time crafted out in our day is so important. Even if it's just a half an hour hot bubble bath, whatever it is that's going to make you feel good. I think actually, first of all, we can just take a step back and think about how are we utilising our own time for our own well-being, because the happier and healthier you are, the happier and healthier everybody else is around you. So that's the first thing I would say. And I would say that I did a lot of work around looking internally at my own beliefs and my own thought patterns, because subconsciously what we tell ourselves is what our brain looks for evidence for. So if we're telling ourselves that we're not feeling great, we're depressed, we're anxious, whilst you might be feeling that isn't who you are. It's just the feeling that you are experiencing. It's actually what you're doing that's going to either kind of push past that, push through it, or sit in or be in that moment of anxiousness or anxiety, whatever it is. So for me, being able to recognize, first of all, what is that feeling behind it? What are you telling yourself? Can you start to reframe some of what you're telling yourself so that actually your brain will then start to look for evidence to support it? Because the brain doesn't like anything complicated. It likes everything to be very simple. So if you're telling yourself that you're anxious, all that's going to happen is your brain is going to look for more evidence to support it. You know, when something really bad happens in your day, and then all of a sudden everything else turns into a catastrophe at the same time, that it's for that reason, the psychological reason, is because we're just looking for other ways to support that evidence that, oh, it's such a bad day, I've just lost this client, oh, now my tree's blown down into my garden, and now my kids are being grumpy, and it just builds and builds and builds. Now, a lot of people talk about this in terms of law of attraction. What we attract, what we put out is what we attract. And in reality, it's kind of right. Like we only have a certain amount of energy to use up every single day. And if you're putting that energy out in a negative way, you're going to receive negativity back. And I know that may sound a little bit woo-woo to people, but when you experience something like that for yourself, those people that have experienced this will know that, yes, that's absolutely 100% true. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to recognize when you do need support. I'm not a big believer in talking therapy. I had 7 years of talking therapy after Thomas was diagnosed with meningitis. It didn't work for me. I'm not suggesting it doesn't work for other people, but for me, it kept me stuck in the moment, and it didn't actually help me to progress anything. So I then discovered rapid transformational therapy, which really helped me. Rapid transformational therapy is like a combination of NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, retraining the brain, and cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnosis. So it kind of combines a few different tools and techniques from my understanding. I'm not a rapid transformational therapist, but I received that therapy and it really helped me, because what it did is get to the root cause very quickly. And then I just listened to a track every single night for about 4 weeks. I still listen to it now occasionally. And it just started to reset my belief pattern. And that was very productive for me. So from my experience, reaching out for support is definitely something to consider, but thinking about what you can do for yourself as well at the same time. I think it just depends on people's personalities. I'm very much an optimist, have always been. Always see the opportunity in everything, always see the silver lining. So for me, I guess it was easier for me to work on myself, because I would always look at how I could use that pain to fuel me, how I could use that pain to help others, how I could use that pain to drive me to launch my podcast, for example, how I could use that pain to build my business to help other people that I knew had been through a similar experience, maybe not exactly the same, but having a negative relationship with money.
Speaking of money, as I was listening to your story, I picked up on a lot of different passions and a lot of different pain points where potentially you could have said, this is what I want to help people through. This is what I want to help women through. Why did money ultimately become the vehicle that you chose to work on with people?
It made sense for me, I guess, because I was in financial services. I'm a qualified financial advisor. So it made sense for me to kind of use my skills and experience, plus what I was really passionate about, and bring those things together. So it just made sense. I actually, interestingly, and I've only really just thought about this now you've asked that question, I actually pushed it away for a long time. I always looked for, what else can I do that's different, that isn't about money? But the reason I kept doing that was because I didn't think that I could do it in a way that everybody else is doing it. And this is really interesting for me, because actually by going against the grain of what everybody else is doing, which is what I'd always done in my life, I'd always looked to what other people do and just either copied it or, kind of just followed the herd, herd mentality, that kind of behavioral bias there. For me, that it was scary to think about doing something that nobody else was doing. There's very few financial advisors in the UK that are also qualified financial coaches. And actually, when I started the business 2 years ago, I then started getting a lot of speaker opportunities in the industry, and standing on a Morningstar stage, which is a massive conference platform over here in the UK, standing on the Morningstar stage as a speaker, talking about my son's illness and the impact it had on me as an advisor. You can imagine my story sandwiched between a compliance conversation and a conversation about risk and return. Like, it just stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
And I had a whole ton of people rush to me at the end of that going, oh my God, that was amazing. That was so inspiring. And I had one person message me afterwards going, oh, do you know what? There was this 55-year-old guy sitting next to me that was like, oh, who has time to implement coaching into their business? Who's got time to start doing all of that? And I thought, perfect, that's just what I wanted. I wanted that reaction to evidence the fact that I was actually doing something completely different to anybody else. And consequently for me, I've now become this micro influencer in the financial services profession because nobody else was doing this. And that's opened up a lot of opportunities for me. So it's a funny old thing sometimes. I think you have to go with your intuition. And that, for me, it wasn't as necessarily about money in the early days. But then when I put together my experience of helping women with their body confidence, my personal experience and my qualifications and experience, it just clicked. And I was like, this is what I was put on this planet to do. This is what I was put on this planet to help as many women to be as resilient as possible. And I can give you a whole ton of other experiences and things I've been through in my life to demonstrate that resiliency. And I'm sure many of your listeners will have their own stories and their own experiences that make them resilient. And right now, this is an opportunity for us to be building those resiliency muscles, you know. And I know this is a tough time for a lot of people. And if you're listening to this in the future and thinking, what is she talking about? We're probably going through another financial crisis right now, or something else is going on in the world. Everything is a test. Everything is an opportunity for you to build those resiliency muscles. As hard as it feels in that moment, you won't feel it in the moment, but you'll look back on it and be like, wow, now we can deal now with another crisis where we all have to go online, because we'll all know how to operate our businesses online, for example. So there's always good that comes out of every opportunity.
Speaking of the current situation that future listeners may be wondering, what is the current future situation? At the moment, money is actually a big deal. A lot of industries have just disappeared overnight. A lot of self-employed people who really rely on that customer-facing service, their businesses have just been decimated. So I think a lot of people are worrying about money right now. And money, as you described in your story, often has this very close emotional connection. We have this emotional relationship with money. For people who are experiencing a variety of difficult emotions around money just now, what would you be saying to them to help them through their financial worries and concerns just now?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, understand what that emotion is. So is it grief? Is it shame? Is it anxiety? Is it sadness? What is the emotion that sits behind that? Because money is just a tool. It's not money that causes that emotion. It's the impact that it has on the rest of our life that causes that emotion. So the first thing I would do is to recognize, what is this specific emotion? So when you feel anxious or shameful or guilty or whatever that emotion is, first of all, just pause. Literally just pause in that moment and think, what is this emotion I'm feeling right now? And just recognize, bring some awareness to what that actually looks like and feels like. And the second part to that then is, where are you actually storing that emotion? Where are you feeling that in that moment? Is it in the throat? Is it in the pit of your stomach? You know, are you carrying it in your neck, around your shoulders? Are you carrying it in your head? Do you get a headache when you're thinking about those money worries? So actually thinking about where you store it in your body is interesting and curious. That would be the word I would use. Just bring some curiosity to that. And then, for example, if you're feeling anxious because right now you've just lost your income, or right now you have lost half your household income, for example, then the practical stuff needs to, then come in. So practically, from a practical position, what can you do to continue to exist on whatever lifestyle you need to exist on? And for people, that will be at different levels. That for some people that will mean if they're on the breadline, that they no longer can even meet their food bills. And there's lots of support available there. It could be that now you need to think about, right, well, I can't operate my events business right now, for example, but what can I do? And this is an opportunity again to be thinking about, what can I do? And just managing that the best that you possibly can. Because actually, outside of our own financial comfort zone, there's lots of things that we can't control. So it's thinking about what we can control, because we'll all get through this. We'll all get through this time, as we have done in many other instances in history. It's just about finding the best way to get to manage that for yourself. But when you feel that emotion, recognizing it is just an emotion, it's not who you are, is really important. What emotion is it that you're feeling? How else could you create that feeling of support and well-being and happiness and security and safety, all of the things that we want to be feeling that money gives us? How else could we create that in our lives? So, for example, very simple example, if you're feeling this fear or emotion of not enough-ness, then is that coming from a judgment of what other people might be thinking about you right now, or is this coming from your own internal judgment? A lot of emotion around money comes from external judgment. What's our parents going to say about us? What's my brother going to say about me? It's this external judgment. And actually, a lot of our own patterns of belief around money actually come through the generations. They're actually not even emotions that we've even formed for ourselves. They've just been given to us from our parents and from their parents. And there's a great book actually that I would highly recommend if anyone's interested in this to read. And I forget the author's name. His first name's Mark, but I forget his surname. But it's a book called It Didn't Start With You. And it's a really interesting book about how we actually inherit those belief patterns generationally. And actually, my mum and I were having a conversation the other day about how her dad was in the prisoner of war camps in the Shanghai prison in the Second World War. He survived. And we were talking about how, he came out of that prisoner of war camp weighing like 5.5 stone. His wife, my gran, who's still alive today, made him rice pudding when he came out of the prisoner of war camp, because that was his favorite food. And he wouldn't touch it. He couldn't eat it because he'd lived on rice for years in the camps. But and unfortunately, he died when my mum was 11 or 12 years old of a heart attack, and I'm sure that contributed towards it. But his relationship with food was created by his experience of being in the prisoner of war camps. And actually, my mum's not got a very good relationship with food, and neither have I. So I wonder whether that generationally, without passing any blame here on anybody, I wonder generationally whether that's been passed down the generations, that we're not allowed to feel good about food. Really interesting. So I forgot where I was going with this now. I think in terms of the emotion around money, take it back to what is the emotion, bring some curiosity to that. Where are you feeling it in your body? And then how else could you create that feeling that's the opposite to that, of well-being and security and safety in a time where perhaps you're feeling insecure around money? Mm-hmm. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah. So let's delve into the current situation a little bit more. I want to put some Corona context into what we've been talking about, which we have been so far. First of all, Catherine, how have you been affected by coronavirus and isolation? What's been happening for you and your household?
Not a significant change for us, fortunately, in the fact that I've spent 2 years of hard graft in actually building an online business. So for me, I have memberships, I have courses, I have online masterminds, I have my podcast in her financial shoes. All of those things can continue with me. So I've actually been working from home for the last 24 months. So actually the impact for me in my business is is fairly limited. Obviously, I've had things like speaker fees and speaker events being cancelled or rearranged. My husband works in financial services. He, at the moment, is okay. He's not been furloughed, but who knows what will happen there. So for me, the actual biggest impact on us is having the children at home and having to balance between both of us trying to work and entertaining and homeschooling a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Do you have any insights or suggestions that can help people get through this time at the moment, overcome some of the problems and challenges, some of which we've touched upon? Have you got any more insights or ideas that can help people at this time?
I think other than what we talked about, the phrase for me, there's 2 phrases for me that I've been using myself, which has really helped. One is it's about progress, not perfection. And I think you can apply that to whether you're in business or whether you've got a job right now. Every day is about progress, not perfection. Don't try and be the perfect teacher in your house right now if you're having to teach children. You know, if someone said to us 2 weeks ago, like, you're going to become a teacher in your house, I'm sure the majority of us would have been like, yeah, hell no, I'm not taking that job. It's just been put upon us. We are parents, we're not teachers. So I would actually just remember that right now it's about keeping our children safe. It's not about you replicating what they've been doing in school. You know, so don't feel bad if you need to throw the iPad at them for an extra half an hour or an extra hour. You know, it doesn't make you a bad parent. So just kind of position where we're at right now. But I think it is about progress, not perfection. Don't try and make everything perfect right now. If you can get through the day without potentially wanting to reach out for a divorce contract by the end of this, or throwing your children on eBay, for example, like, I don't, you know, we just got to actually really think about what's important right now more than anything. That would be my first tip. And the second thing actually was I was inspired by Frozen 2, the Disney film that's recently been released. And I think there's a whole ton of lessons in that film that we can take in this moment. Of actually one of the songs, if you want to download the album, which my 6-year-old's been delightfully dancing around the house in his frozen dress and his little waving his little wand around the house, is one of the lyrics in the songs is about the next best thing. So what is the next best thing that you need to do for yourself right now? Whatever that is what you need to do. So forget what everybody else is doing. What is the next best thing? Is that you wrapping a blanket around yourself and having a well-being day with your children, watching a film, Netflix reruns, you know, switching social media off, whatever that is? You know, if it means defollowing all the negativity on social media right now, that's what I've been doing, just gently pausing or defriending or defollowing people that are causing negativity. Because it's not good for your well-being. I've actually stopped watching the news now as well. So I think those would be my recommendations. It's about progress, not perfection, and what's the next best thing that you can do right now that's important for yourself without thinking about anybody else.
Mm-hmm. A couple times today you've used the words opportunity and opportunities. Do you think there are any opportunities in our current situation?
My answer, yes, absolutely. But I always see opportunity in everything. Am I saying that right now everybody's feeling that opportunity? No, there'll be a whole lot of people out there that will be struggling right now and being squeezed and feeling squeezed. So I think it would be a little bit amiss of me to say, oh, go and think of the opportunity for you right now. But I think absolutely there is opportunity, because there is opportunity in everything, even irrelevant of the coronavirus right now. There is opportunity in everything, every lesson, every painful experience, every pleasurable experience, everything has opportunity. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in that every day that we wake up, every experience that we have, every lesson that we have is an opportunity. And I actually, every Sunday, I sit down with a piece of paper and I split it into 4. And the first thing I look at is, what have I achieved that week? What are my wins for the week? And then I think about what have been the challenges for me this week. And then I think about what have the lessons been that I've learned. And then the fourth thing is, what's my focus for the week ahead? And it really helps my mindset to just think about what have I achieved this week? And it can be the little things that make the biggest difference. I managed to get out of bed on time every morning this week, whatever that small thing is. And then, what's been the challenges? Have I got in my own way? Have other people got in my way? Have there been external challenges, internal challenges? What's got in my way? And which of those can I control? Which of those can I not control? What have I learned about myself or the world or my family or my health? What have I learned about myself that week? And then what's my focus for the week ahead? And I think if you put it into that perspective, there is always going to be opportunity to learn, even if it's not opportunity to create right now, just opportunities to learn. All of us right now I think, have learned how to connect differently. You think about, a lot of people have been relating what we're going through right now to the war. This is the biggest thing we've ever had in our economy, next to the world wars. And yes, it is. But actually, during the war, we weren't being isolated and told you couldn't hug anybody, or you couldn't, chat to your neighbour over the fence and give them a handshake. So it's different challenges. But goodness, like Zoom and all these companies that provide online options must be going mental right now, because we're having to connect and find a way to connect to people in different ways, which I think is incredible. And again, is evident of opportunity to build those resiliency muscles. And yes, I know we all want to give our parents a cuddle right now, but we're finding different ways to connect, all sitting around the table on a Sunday afternoon, having dinner in our own houses, but still being able to connect with people. So yes, there is opportunity. It may not feel like an opportunity, but it's opportunity to grow, to learn, to reconnect, to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm. I like to move away from the doom and gloom, although I don't think there was too much doom and gloom there, to be fair, and finish off looking at some big concepts to round our conversation off today. And the first of these, I remember you mentioned it right at the beginning of our conversation. I can't remember in what context. Talking about gratitude. What are you grateful for, Catherine?
Right now, life, sunshine, food, happiness. The fact that I have a separate office in my house right now. I'm grateful for my kids being at home. I know probably a month ago, the thought of having my children at home every day, oh my goodness, sent me into this spiral of anxiousness, or how am I going to cope? But actually, I've loved it. It's been a different, and it's been a challenge. But I'm a big believer in actually, on a daily basis, going to bed and looking at what are you grateful for that day is so empowering. And I have a gratitude diary next to my bed. I don't write in it every night. I'm not going to lie. I don't write in it every night. I would love to say I do, but I don't. Sometimes I do it at night. Sometimes I do it in the morning. But the book, The Alchemist,
amazing
taught
book.
me a lot about, that book taught me, and so not the Alchemist. What am I talking about? The Author's Way. The Author's Way.
I've never read that one.
Alchemist is a very different book, although it's equally a very inspirational book. The Alchemist, is one of my favourite books. But the Artist's Way is a wonderful book. It's actually a 12-week program. So actually probably a good book to be reading right now for the next 12 weeks, potentially. It's a great book to get stuck into, because it teaches you about the value of journaling and creatively. I mean, it was written for artists, but creatively getting some of what's going on up here in your minds onto paper, practicing gratitude. One of the best exercises I've done is about what your heart desires. So actually sitting there and listing, from 1 to 10 things that your heart desires right now. And interesting, when I did this literally about 6 weeks ago, the first thing on the top of that list for me was a cherry blossom tree in my garden. I've always had this thing about cherry blossom trees. I just think they're beautiful and really calming. And I planted a tree in a pot in my garden last year, and it hasn't budded. Well, it's budded, but it hasn't bloomed. And I looked at the garden thinking, oh, it still hasn't bloomed. I still haven't got my cherry blossom tree. And then I walked upstairs, looked out of my window, and my next door neighbour had this beautifully blossoming pink blossom tree. And I was like, seriously, I've never seen this tree before. It's literally just appeared. Whether they planted it last year or whether it's just started to bloom, I've never seen it before. So I'm so grateful for that right now. I literally written it down on my piece of paper, and then I walk upstairs and there it is. So talk about manifestation. But being grateful for those little things is so useful in times when we're not feeling particularly positive, you know. And don't get me wrong, you may be listening to this or watching this thinking, oh my God, she's all optimism and, you know, it's all, everything's positive. But don't get me wrong, I have days and times where I just, I feel emotional and I need to go and cry, and I need to get it out of my system. And I think we need to do that. Just recognize that actually being sad and having a good cry is sometimes all we need to do, and get it out of our system and dance around the kitchen and, you know, put some silly music on and just get it out. Because otherwise, if we store it in our body, that's when it harbors in our body, and then that's when it can create, you know, a significant impact on our mental well-being.
Mm-hmm. Moving from gratitude into love, how do you think we can bring more love into the world?
Oh, what a lovely question. I think you have to love yourself first before you can love others. And it's taken me a long time to say that. And actually, even when I say it, I get quite emotional thinking about it, because actually how we value ourselves is a mirror on how we value the world. And if you don't value yourself and you don't have self-worth, then you'll find it more difficult to actually see the world for what it has to offer you and the love that's available to you in the world. If you don't feel it yourself, you'll always be seeking external validation for somebody else to give that love to you. And nobody else can give that love to you but yourself. And this is something I learned in my rapid transformational therapy sessions, in that inner child that often is what is driving our behaviors and our conscious thoughts. We can just give that to ourselves. You know, whatever it was that we didn't have growing up as children, or what we don't have right now, we can just give that to ourselves. And once we do that, we then open up being able to experience love in a whole different way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Moving from love to loved ones, this would be a good question for you. With your boys at the age that they are, I think this event that we're going through right now is going to result in some very significant changes going into how we do things and the way that we look at the world. And I think the young children of just now are really going to inherit these changes, and they're going to have to live with whatever outcomes and differences come out of this situation. And I'd like you to imagine, Catherine, you've got one of these children before you now. Maybe it's your own child, but probably someone else's, so you can be objective. And you're going to say something to this child to prepare them for the life that they're going to live. What would you be saying to that child?
I don't think I can be objective in this response because I have my own children. I'll give it a go. So what would I say to that child? What was the final part of that question?
To prepare them for the life they're about to live.
Wow. I don't think there's a singular thing that you can say to a child to prepare them for the world and to prepare them for life. I think that it's a combination of your behaviours and what you say. So it's what you say and what you demonstrate through your behaviour. Because children, depending on the age that they're at, and sorry, this isn't a very simple question. I'll answer to your question. But I think that children are very clever, and depending on the age that they're at, will depend on whether they're more influenced by what they see or by what they feel. Most children by the age of 7 have already established their relationship with themselves and with the world. And so as a younger child, if you have younger children, actually how you make them feel is really important, more so than necessarily what you say. I think if you've got teenagers, they're probably not even going to listen to what you have to say. I don't have teenagers right now, but for friends who do have teenagers and my family that have teenage children, often they start to develop their own way of thinking, and they think that their way of thinking is the only way of thinking or the right way of thinking. And so actually in your behavior, the way that you are around them or the way that you are behaving is quite paramount. So I actually don't think that there's a hard or fast rule in terms of what you say to them to prepare them for the world. I think it's a combination of what you say, how you make them feel, and how you are in yourself and your own behaviors, which comes back to my earlier point about loving yourself, because if they're not seeing that, they're not going to feel that either. So I think it's being mindful of what you're saying and what you're doing in your behaviors, and trying to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. Is there's no better role model than you trying to be the best version, which means you're going to get things wrong as well as get things right. And it's important that they see both, because if a child grows up seeing and feeling perfection, or your version of perfection, then if they're going to feel that if they don't have that life of perfection, that you're going to judge them, and that they're not going to feel worthy, because they want to make you proud. At the end of the day, kids like to make their parents proud. So I would say, from my experience and my own feelings, be the best version of yourself, and teach your children through your behaviors and through what you say that they can be the best version of themselves. That was quite deep. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a deep question. I was looking for a deep answer. Moving from the start of life to the end of life, I want you to imagine that you're at the end of your life and you're looking back at the time that you've been given here on earth, and you're going to evaluate, what life did I live? And most importantly, when you get to that point, what legacy do you want to have left behind you?
So what's the question? What legacy do I want to leave?
What legacy do you want to leave?
Yeah, for me, my legacy is to equip and prepare 1 million women to be financially resilient. And if I can look back at myself as my 90-year-old version of myself, looking back at my life, I would be hugely proud if I can leave a legacy of empowerment and confidence, so that more women can feel in a position that they have the opportunity, as much as anybody else, to feeling empowered to make their own decisions confidently, irrelevant of their money, their wealth, their relationship, irrelevant of all of those things, just to feel good about themselves and to feel worthy and self-worth, specifically in relation to money. Then I would feel like I've done my purpose and I've done the best that I can do, and be the best version of myself.
For anyone who's been listening today, Catherine, and they've resonated with your story, your message, any of the ideas that you've shared, and they want to find out a little bit more about who you are and what you do, where would you be directing them to go?
Yeah, sure. So if anybody wants to connect with me, then you can come to my website, which is do we even say this anymore? www.themoneypanel.co.uk. That's my business. Or you can connect with me on my personal website, which is Catherine Morgan, catherine.com. Or alternatively, you can hear me rabble on my podcast, which is In Her Financial Shoes. And that's on all the popular podcast channels, Spotify and iTunes.
Catherine, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I've particularly noted your resilience in all of the things that you've talked about, your story, and even your approach to life and your work. I think there's a real resilience to that, and a desire to share that resilience and give that resilience to other people. So I want to just mark that and appreciate that here today on the podcast.
Thank you. I'll put that on my gratitude diary tonight. Thank you very much.
To continue to help you through this isolation period, I've decided to open up my Author Your Life Academy for free for the next 3 months. Author Your Life is my online educational community where you can access training sessions, workshops, and question and answers, and connect with other people around the world who are going through this situation and trying to make the best of things. The Academy normally costs $27 a month to subscribe, but for the next 3 months, I'm going to open that up for free. Essentially, you're getting a 3-month free trial of the platform. To access the Author Your Life Academy, go to authoryourlife.org/academy, and when prompted, enter the code CORONA in block capitals. Yes, what else would the code be? CORONA in block capitals, and that will take your $27 subscription down to zero for the next 3 months. The Academy is where I'm going to be focusing a lot of my content during this difficult time. It's where I'm trying to bring people together to help and support each other as we go through this period of isolation, of fear, of uncertainty. I hope the Academy is something that will be able to help you too during this situation. So if you want to come in and join us, as I said, go to authoryourlife.org/academy, and when you sign up, enter the code CORONA, and that will give you 3 months for free. It's my gift to you to try and help and support during this time as best I can. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.